Welcome, my name is Michael Beeson, and I'll be the moderator for this panel. We have all of our panel members assembled up here, as you can see, and we're ready to go. And this is one of our most popular sessions because we get to talk about some of the issues going on in the industry and have a lot of dialogue about industry issues. And we picked some pretty good ones today, and so I'm excited to get into them. Our panel today, I'm going to have them introduce themselves to you, are from just kind of a variety of different industries and specialties. So we should get a really broad perspective on the topics that we're going to entertain. So Mario, could you start?
My name is Mario Robles, CEO for MPC Industries. We polish and grind for the aerospace industry.
My name is Jason Cox. I'm the Chief Technical Officer for Cox Machine in Wichita. We do fabricated and machined structural components.
My name is Douglas Green. I'm the president of Hickson Metal Finishing, located right here in Newport Beach, and we do special processing for the aerospace, military, and defense industries.
Good afternoon. My name is Glyn Fletcher. I'm the president of Aji Shami here in the Americas. So quite a little bit of real estate. It goes from Alaska all the way down to the tip of Argentina. We are a manufacturer and supplier of specialized machining centers, electro-discharge machines, 5-axis machining centers, and laser ablation machines.
I'm Frank Thompson, a VP of Supply Chain at Parker Aerospace, and we're actually headquartered right here in Irvine as well.
Hi, my name's Dwight Moore. I'm Chief Operating Officer with National Technical Systems. We're a $175 million public company, and we perform testing, engineering services, supply chain services, and quality registration. Thank you.
Tim Holland, CEO, President of Graco Supply Company. Our headquarters is in Fort Worth. We have 5 locations in the U.S., 1 in El Salvador. We are a specialty distribution company of aerospace materials, paints, adhesives, sealants, solvents, lubricants, and do supply chain management for our customers and packaging of materials.
Okay, thank you. So as you can see, a lot of variety, a broad range of different industries, hopefully something that connects to those in the audience. And the way this goes is I've asked the panel members to prepare some comments on the topic, but really what we'd like to do is hear from you in the audience. And so we've got microphones that we're planning on using so that we can capture and be able to hear your comments and questions. It's possible on any topic to make a comment, to ask a question. One or more panel members may answer your question or interact with your comments. So really it's wide open for anything that you'd like to say on the topic. And they're getting our microphones ready over there right now. So when you get ready to ask a question or make a comment, just raise your hand so that they know and they can come over and bring you a microphone. Okay? All right. So here's our first topic. And actually it may be our only topic because I've had a lot of people say to me that we could probably fill the time just talking about this topic. It's a discussion about what it takes for a supplier to reach 100% on time and 0 PPM performance and to explore perspectives from different industry points of view. And so what we're targeting here is a discussion about, is it possible? Is it even possible? Is it economical? Here's the current C certification criteria for, on-time delivery, OTD, and parts per million quality performance. And we took this as a result of polling a number of our customers and kind of getting an idea of the range that our customers use, and then, talking to suppliers and taking a look at the current performance ranges that we are in. Of course, our customers, a lot of them develop, scorecards and bronze, silver, gold performance measures on us. So it's not like this doesn't have precedent in the industry. But, you know, what are we having to do to achieve it? Is it realistic to be, you know, a gold performer? And that's what our discussion today is about. Some of the questions that I would forward for the panel discussion: why is it important to our organization? How important is it to competitive performance? So why do we have to do this? Do we have to do it? And, you know, where are we on our journey to achieving that perfect performance? What are the unique challenges in achieving it in our industry, and what are the costs and return on investment in doing it? So if this topic takes up all of our time, that's fine. We'll do a break somewhere in the middle and continue on. So, you know, we're wide open as far as, you know, how long it takes to discuss this topic, and really want to hear from you on your views from the perspective of your industry, so that we get a really broad perspective on what's going on in the industry with regard to this topic. So, who wants to start? Panel members, are you ready? All right. We can start with anybody, or I can start naming names.
I think I'd like to talk about the third question on your slide, which is what are the challenges that are unique to our industry, being the aerospace and defense industry. And I think the clear one is the high mix and low volume of our products. We toured an automotive manufacturer 2 years ago, I guess, and he was achieving 100% quality at that time. And for us, I can understand 100% delivery. I can see what we would have to do to get to 100% delivery. It doesn't seem impossible to me, but 100% quality seems very, very difficult to me. And so we went to this automotive manufacturer and said, how do you achieve zero defects? How do you achieve 100% quality? And he said, well, I'll show you. And we went out in his plant, and we walked around, and we looked at his cells that he had set up, and they were set up very well. They were very mistake-proofed all through the cell, so that it was impossible for things to be put together backward. And he had very excellent visual aids that were appropriate for what was being done and understood well by all the employees. And this all made perfect sense. And we said, how many people does it take to maintain your visual aid material? And he had a staff of 6, I think, for a company with 100 people. So that's heavy for that size of company. But again, it's something I can understand. And then we started talking about statistical deviation, and he said that they had to establish the statistical deviation before they could sell a part to their customer. And we said, how do you do that? And he said, well, we run 300 parts. So we run 300 parts, and we throw them in the trash, and then we have our statistical deviation, and then we can start to fine-tune our process, and then maybe run another 300 until we get it correct. You know, and for most of us, that's the entire life of the program that we're working on. So I think that's one of the huge challenges that we're going to have to figure out how to address.
Jason, share a little bit more about your business and the kind of batch sizes you're using, and, you know, just what's relevant to your comments.
Sure. We most of our work is commercial as opposed to military. It's primarily commercial, and you know, a gold standard there would be like the 737, where you're making, you know, 31 or 36 parts a month in a continuous fashion. And so that gives you an opportunity to get not automotive numbers, but something approaching a steady flow where you can develop a cell around it. But we are on a lot of other programs where maybe the entire life of the program is 100 planes, or maybe you build 12 parts a year. And so we have to be able to be flexible enough with our setups in the machining world to be able to accommodate something like that with a reduced setup, so that we can run the parts and get it out. On our 737 work, we would have used to have built 6 months worth of product at a time. We would set up, run 6 months worth of product, and then stored it. So with the advent of the cells, we can now run a 1 month quantity or 2 week quantity. So we like to run 2 week quantities where we can with an extremely short setup. You set up, run 15 pieces, and tear down and run the next, which keeps our inventory low.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. Comments or questions for Jason? Yes. Hold on one second.
Since you have such a low volume, do you do any accelerated life testing in order to see whether your parts coming out are uniformly adequate, as opposed to statistical measurement, for example?
We do not. All of our parts are built to print for the customer, and so we are relying upon their engineering analysis originally in the design of the part. So we don't do any accelerated life testing, for instance, to find fatigue cracking or something like that. In our particular case, that would be the customer's responsibility since we're not designing the product.
Okay, other questions or comments for Jason? Okay, thank you.
Well, I'll tag along to that. We're a little bit different. We're a batch process. So our PPM is finally under 2,000, but it was a struggle coming from 10, 20, 30,000. And to get much below 2,000, though I know the primes want to hear 200 or below, is a real challenge. We literally processed about 9 million parts last year, but the problem is that sounds like a lot. So statistically, you could get some good numbers, but we processed over 86,000 different part numbers. So a big run for us may be 20 parts and then all of a sudden 100. But in a batch process, you can wipe out 100, 200 parts. We don't run one part at a time, or in the case of that guy, 300. So we have one bad day in January of 2012. We have 2,000 ppm for the rest of the year already, and we got to go another 11 and a half months. So it is a challenge, but maybe segueing into the number one question, it's critical because we live and die on those performance ratings. If we drop below a certain performance rating, we get put on a list, and that list isn't very pleasant, and you get a lot of visibility you don't want. So they are critical. One of our biggest complaints is they're subjective. Certainly on-time delivery is fairly easy to look at. It's did you deliver, did you not? But when you get into subjectivity about color, and we had a recent issue, and we were dealing with gloss. And there's ways to measure gloss. There's also ways to measure gloss wrong. So we had tons of parts rejected because the gloss index was wrong. And it was a subjective matter because the basically inspector was using a flashlight to look at the gloss rather than a gloss meter. And he said it was too glossy, so we got a ding. So it's a big issue. It's a tough issue, but we got to have some standards. I agree with that. We just need to figure out a way to make them less subjective, especially on the quality side, and have an open forum of how we, talk back and forth and get those, a commonality, of what the standards are.
Questions or comments for Doug? Anybody have any similar experiences?
We unfortunately, same issue with, for instance, our copper plate. Your copper plate isn't as shiny as the other guy's copper plate. Well, they might use a different bath or, something. I mean, the subjectivity is now we're working to a pretty standard, where it doesn't say in the spec, it's got to be a certain, shininess, or it's got to be pretty. So that is a challenge that we live to every day.
Yeah, so it sounds like when you start notching down, and I really have to acknowledge Doug, because one of his customers is on the panel. So.
But that wasn't us. No. Parker's perfect, trust me. We took away all the flashes.
But of course, when you're notching down, trying to get to 0 ppm, then issues like pretty index and, this kind of stuff is going to get to be a lot bigger issue, isn't it? Because you're really trying to notch down on a number that most people think, may be impossible, and you're trying to put belief into the system, and, the use of subjective standards like prettiness or color, rather than really homing in on that and saying, okay, here's a definable standard that we can all agree and use, right? Gets to be a big issue. Whereas when you were at 20,000 parts per million, who cares? It's not even the subject you want to talk about. So very good. Any other comments on that? Examples back here? Bill, can you get him a mic?
Hi, Doug. Just a quick question for you, and I'm just trying to understand is, all of a sudden you get into this subjectivity, and we're on the testing side, and we get into subjectivity on dates and things, but how do you deal with that contractually? I mean, is it a contractual obligation to even go there, and how do you keep that client relationship certainly at a level you want to keep it at for future business?
Yeah, we actually wish we could get it contractually, but we can't. Obviously the purchase order drives, it's the original driving document, then flows into some diagrams, drawings, specs, those type of things. So, like you were speaking, you just can't write that in. There's not enough words. There's not enough vocabulary to write these prettiness specs or luster or gloss and those type of things because they're not necessarily definable always. We buy paints from different companies, and the exact same paint that we put on product A versus product B, because it's a different manufacturer, it meets all the specifications, meets all the requirements. However, Inspector A just doesn't like the different look, so he'll reject it for a visual. But again, at the end of the day, they are the customer. And the customer defines the quality, and the quality is what the customer says it is. So we just try to mitigate that through having a good working relationship. We have people that literally go out, they'll look at it, and they'll sit down with the engineers and say, these are the parameters at to which we can process. And I guess our ultimate goal is to educate the buyers, the quality people at the different companies, so they really know what we do, what we go through, and education is key, as well as communications. So it boils down to communicating, but the problem is it does cost money. We have a staff of people that look at these reports every single month and argue over these reports every single month, with the exception of Parker.
This question, because we certainly have no motivation as well to ding you where it's not appropriate. I mean, we have similar objectives internally. Our objectives for outbound is got to be into the low triple digits. So we're low triple digits to our customers. Now, inbound from our suppliers, we're running at about what we consider gold standard, which is totally unacceptable. We're running about 2,800 RPPM. And with the expectation is that whatever the number is, we're reducing that by half over years. So we've gone from 5,000 to 4,000 to under 3,000 over the last couple of years. So I would hope that, particularly where you've got subjective things, is that collectively you reach out to the customer, because where those things haven't been solidified, we need to make sure that we come together and get objective criteria to avoid that in the future. Because again, nobody is compensated or rewarded based upon finding things and getting extra credit for rejections. But what they're trying to do is to do their job, and sometimes without standards, they overcorrect to try to achieve that. So I would encourage on those that are subjective, sit down, get together with the leadership, because it's not going to be the inspector. It's get together with the leadership, come together and make sure that you define some clear criteria that you can get through those. I think my bigger challenge is how do we go back and address, because I think without a doubt, Jason, you had a very valid point with respect to our low volume, high mix. But the reason why it's so important, it's good or bad, is everybody's taking inventory out of the chain, right? And so the consequences of a rejection is the machine stops. And nobody, and you think about right now, Boeing is rate ramping up, right? Airbus is ramping up, and we have all this other stuff that's coming in production. And nobody wants to allow the machine to stop. Boeing has added over 200 people dedicated to working out with their suppliers, out in the field. Bombardier has added over 75 people. So I'm telling you what, the customers are staffing up to give you more than your proportionate share of help if you have a quality issue. It used to be you had a rejection, you're allowed some time to go do cause and corrective action, you put that back in, you rework it. I think now the corrective action is is urgent. You've got to have backup parts ready to support because nobody wants the machine to stop. So, just a perspective, and I agree, it's not easily done. But that's, if we think it's been a challenge in the past, it's going to get worse, and we're going to get a lot of help to help make it improve.
Any questions or comments for Frank? Over here.
I guess I have two. One is for Doug. One of the things that we did in the past year was we had put together a workmanship standard on cosmetics inside of our building. And then we have different customers that we're selling the same product to, and they're all ending up in the same place on the same flight deck. Our company does human-to-machine lighted interface for the flight deck, a lot of painted, lighted material. And pilots are very, very fussy. They don't want anything to call attention to their eye. And so everyone's very fussy about cosmetics. So we had written a workmanship standard internally. We sifted through hundreds, maybe thousands of photographs that we'd taken of defects, and we went back and we looked at different customers and what they were rejecting compared, Boeing rejects 0.03% of our product because on one platform we're first tier, whereas another customer would be rejecting 3% of the same product. And so we went to Boeing and said, what is it that you like? Here's our workmanship standard. And they actually wrote the workmanship standard into their documentation. We were able to approach the right person at the right time. It took a while to find that person. And then now if our customer is trying to reject something, we say, here's the workmanship standard. And by the way, this workmanship standard's been adopted by Boeing. Now, we were lucky, and I had one person who was so tired of dealing with customer returns, she said, I'm going to write a workmanship standard. And I mean, she was one person. One person just really took it on. She took on the world, in my opinion, and moved forward with it. So we were kind of lucky on that perspective. On the other side, just trying to not shut down the machine. We've had customers come to us in the last maybe 2-3 weeks and letting us know that anything that's going on the 787 as an example, their expectation is to have a corrective action in place before we've ever seen the part and done analysis. And they said they're sorry, but because on this particular platform we're second tier, they're trying to answer Boeing, and they just came in to give us a pep talk on making sure we react quickly. And we were just with a supplier of ours that's down here this morning telling them the same thing. I need you to react as quickly as possible. I think we're all shored up to do it, and we're trying to do it without any extra people because we know we can't bring people on for the short term. It's just not appropriate.
Very good, thank you. Any panel members, did you have any comment to that? Okay, any other comments or questions in the audience before we move on? Okay. Dwight, go ahead.
As I mentioned earlier, we're a testing engineering service supply chain and registration company. And makes us a little bit unique here, I guess, as from a panel point of view, in that every job that we do is unique, and our final product is a report, a piece of paper, it's a certificate, it's a qualification report of some kind. And also in our business, it's usually one of the last hurdles that a manufacturer has to get over before they can do a product launch, or they maybe make a modification to their product and have to get it back out in the field. So on-time delivery is obviously very, very important. So we're continuously striving to meet the on-time deliverables that we set in conjunction with our customers. It's also imperative from a parts per million point of view that we get the testing right the first time, because if we do something wrong, obviously you might have to do some retesting, or even a worst case, if the part gets damaged and has to go back through a testing program, that's obviously not a good thing. So clearly, we're striving for that 100% and this lowest PPM as we can get in our industry. And our industry, like everyone else's here, is very competitive. And if we aren't continually improving and getting there, another company is certainly going to step up and take business away from us.
All right. Questions or comments for Dwight? Dwight, in your business, on-time delivery is, because of what the product is, it's delivering the report when you said you would, right? Or the report or whatever the documentation is. That's on-time delivery. So it's delivery to promise. And, or at least we hope it's your, that's, rather than delivery to demand date. Well, it's probably a little bit of both. So, you know, on-time delivery, you have a lot of moving parts. And everything you do is quantity one, basically. So for those who are moaning about small batch sizes and high mix, this is a guy who's got the ultimate mix, right? Quantity one on everything. And the number of moving parts. Have you ever been in a testing lab? Anybody ever been in a testing lab? Yeah, good. Okay. So, I mean, when they test a product or an item, you know, there's like 1,000 moving parts to doing that, and 500 of them are unknown. So, you know, before we moan about, you know, having small batch sizes, you know, with XYZ steps in it, you know, Dwight's trying to deal with, you know, quantity one and an infinite number of moving parts that are different on every single report that they turn out. It's pretty amazing that they would even measure themselves in terms of on-time delivery given those circumstances. But as Dwight said, you know, they know that the customer, for one thing, that you're on the end of the process. So like many of you in the room, you know, when you know what it's like to be on the end of the tail, you're always getting it late and getting demands for it earlier. You know, so testing is usually in that position. So I appreciate the unique qualities about Dwight's business at NTS and what you have to do to actually adopt, you know, 100% on time and 0 PPM. That's probably meets with a lot of disbelief. Here's a question or comment right over here.
Questions for Doug. Much of our business, being job shops, much like we are, having the ability to prepare would be fantastic. However, unfortunately, having to know when the parts are going to show up from day to day is usually impossible. How did you and your team overcome the need for tooling and preparation to make sure the on-time delivery and the quality met the expectations of the customer?
You're assuming we have. No, just kidding. It is a huge challenge. And in fact, we do have some customers that have come to us and said, would it be helpful if we gave you a forward look, you know, X amount of number of parts per month, per year, whatever the case may be? And the answer to that, you know, we went down that path, and the answer was yes, it would be helpful because we're a heavy touch industry where, you know, hands touch parts, and that's how we get the results in both speed and quality. The unfortunate side of that is you know, out of 3,000 customers, if 2 do it, it really doesn't help us. No one company is bigger than, you know, 2.5–3% of our total volume. So we would need, you know, the top 200 to do it to give us any forward look so we could manage manpower. So we stopped whining about it several years ago, and we said we just have to build a system, build a process, a vacuum cleaner, if you will, that when the parts are dropped off at the back door, you unpack them as fast as possible, you get them received and inspected, you get them planned, and you get them in front of the processor really, really quickly, literally within, you know, 10 to 14 hours from the time of delivery. And then, of course, our employees just recognize and understand that our industry is you make all your money in the last 6 business days of the month, not necessarily because our customers need it, but because our customers want to bill it. And it's all about cash flow. So they understand that, you know, they'll have a nice 40-hour work week, week 1, week 2, and about halfway through week 2, 2.5, you know, they're working 10, 12 hours, 7 days a week. So you just have to say it is the industry, it's the game we wanted to play, and you have to build a system and build processes that can handle that non-level loading, and asking for, we don't even begin to ask for, forward-looking plans, because even when we have some of the customers that we're more intimate with, they change. They literally change by week to week, day to day, and then it's expedite mode, those type of things. So just build a system that can handle it.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Good, then moving on. Are we down to, Tim, are you ready to go next?
Sure. I need Frank to cover his ears for a minute here. On the 100% on-time delivery and the 2,000 ppm, one of the things we've seen in the last year, living in the epicenter of two OEMs in our neighborhood, what you're seeing now is the supply chain being so stressed that we're getting letters from CEOs of OEMs saying we just cannot tolerate you missing schedules and having quality issues when you make the schedule. And so now we're going to start charging you for the processing of those nonconformances in a fixed charge fee or by the quantity of them. And if we have to tear something apart, I'm going to charge you for that too. I don't know if any of you all, so that, hold your ears there. But it's serious. I mean, and let us know if you're willing to sign up to that. Because if you're not willing to sign up to that, you're probably not a grow with us supplier going forward. So I mean, that's a sobering. When you start getting those notices, you realize that how important is it? It's survival. If you can get there, you've differentiated yourselves. You've put yourself in a great competitive position, and it's really not optional. Because if you say no, they're going to come say, well, how can we help you get there? If they think enough of you to do that, otherwise they just go to the next one. And so it's do you want to be in this industry or not is where that's going. And we were talking this morning in the Supplier Advisory Council meeting. If you think about the rate ramps that Airbus and Boeing are doing on 737 and A320, they're eating up any capacity that gets freed up from any military program. And the business jet business up in Wichita is still running 50% capacity of what it was in 2008. And that neighborhood is still very, very busy because of those ramps. If they do come back online while some of these ramps are taking place, the competition is going to get even keener for everybody to perform to. So that's what I see from ours. And then just one more little interesting thing. I've said this before in this, but since we're selling paints and adhesives and chemicals, there's a time-sensitive, it's like selling milk. It has an expiration date on it. And I still can't figure out why the industry, they want us to have the material there to supply your paint to you, Doug, but everybody wants, and you need to have it, but everybody wants us to have it in stock and to be able to get it to you just in time. But, oh, by the way, it has to have 90% of the shelf life on it, which is a little bit of a dichotomy, and that never seems to change. So, and then I go to the store, and what do? I reach to the back of the milk because I want the freshest one, but I can't stand it. I can't rationalize it in my own house, in my own business, right?
Very good.
I just want to pick up on a couple of comments that you made there. I think that without a doubt, that phenomena coming back to charge you for defective products is, if it's not a reality in your business, it will be becoming a reality in your business. And a lot of that actually starts at the airlines. So the airlines in their new contracts to the OEMs, the airframers, are basically saying, if this plane doesn't pull back from the gate because of a mechanical problem, the airlines are saying, that's no longer going to be on my nickel. That's going to be on your nickel, whoever provided the product to me. So they're coming back to the OEMs as well, basically saying, if there's a defect where the plane doesn't pull back, whoever provided that product is going to pay for replacement plus the lost time. So it's a consequence that's coming through. There's another consequence that's coming through the supply chain that we all need to be prepared for. Everybody familiar with the Dell model? Where Dell doesn't own any inventory, it sits in a warehouse adjacent to their facility, and all that material sitting in that warehouse is owned by the suppliers. It's coming. It's coming. So you need to be prepared to how you're going to deal with that. We are as well. But you look at the Boeing 787 today, they're dealing with a third-party logistics company. All that material sitting in that warehouse that gets delivered over to their facility every 2 hours is owned by a third party, and the plan is that that will be all owned by suppliers when they get in production. Honeywell is looking at this. A lot of our peers are all looking at how do you take this and say, I don't want to have to deal with rejects. I don't want to have to deal with any of this. What I want is 2 hours before I issue it to my line, I want to make sure it's ready, staged, and available. And I'm not going to even use my people to do it. I'm going to use a third party to move that material to my assembly floor. So the only people that are touching this inside my facility are the people putting it on the aircraft. It's coming. So you need to be prepared for what does that mean for your business. Sorry to hear. It's going to get much worse.
How many in the audience have had chargebacks from their customers? Yeah, and panel too. Okay, so that's looks like it's fairly common. You've run into it, and it's on the increase from the comments that I'm hearing. Also, just to reinforce something that Frank was talking about, I was visiting Bombardier when I ran into a supplier in the restroom who had just gotten a bill for $100,000 for a part that went into flight test and failed. And I think his whole business was probably about $1 million a year, so $100,000 was a pretty major hit. And you know, in a lot of ways, I think Bombardier has been on the leading edge of this because that was about 4 years ago. So some of these practices take time to evolve, but you can kind of see them coming. And the comments that Frank and Tim made, kind of point to the reality that and everybody in every supply chain, not just aerospace, seems to be heading towards the model, let whoever had the problem pay for it. Even down to Kmart and the way they operate with their supply chain. Everybody's trying to shift the cost of problems to the person that had them. So we're not paying for that anymore. And that definitely seems to be a trend in our industry. Other panel comments about this? Okay, ready to,
Yeah, I'd like to ask, maybe point this towards you, Frank. Well, I was at a non-Parker presentation several months ago, and they were talking about corrective certs. And we all know that corrective certs are, they're a necessary, I mean, they're not necessary, but I mean, they're part of our supply chain for whatever reason. And they had indicated that they're going to start charging $200 for every certification that we issue that isn't correct. And I said, I think that's reasonable. I mean, that's fair. If we make a mistake, we should have to pay for the mistake. And, if we're guilty, serve the crime. So I then in turn said to them, however, you do realize that sometimes you give us wrong purchase orders and you cause the error. So therefore, we in turn will charge you $200 for a cert. Is that reasonable? Is it fair? He said, of course not. We're the customer.
I think this is a great example of where you've got to be smart about how you do things. I think if there's defects that come in a product, that's one thing, of going back and addressing it. But I'm also a firm believer that our suppliers bail us out more than they become the problem. So I think in each of these things, and if you were to go back to this other one, because I think delivery is another good example, is that 9 times out of 10, you've bailed us out more than you've caused us problems because of moving schedules. So I'm always one of those ones, because there was some discussion, well, we need to charge people for late deliveries. Well, then we better be prepared to pay for every expedite we have too, because that's a big part of what happens in our business. So I would say we got to be smart in each of these things. I think what we need to do is to work on fixing the problem. But where you've got habitual problems with a process, then I think we need to go back and look at that. But I think as a normal course of business, I don't think I would encourage that philosophy, certainly across Parker.
All right.
I wanted to make a comment. I guess it's a little bit off topic, but talking about what you mentioned about shifting the inventory to the supplier owning the inventory. We have about half of our business now is done that way. So over the past few years, our largest customer is converted. And so about half of our business is vendor-owned inventory. We own it until they remove it from the stocking bin to place on the airplane. And I don't think this is I agree with you, this is something that's going to happen in the industry that we need to be prepared for and ready to move with. I don't think we can all band together and say, no, we're not going to do it. It's going to go that direction. But I wanted to tell you just briefly from our experience that the reason generally is to move cash. I mean, it's to change the cash flow at the OEM. And so to give more cash to the OEM, that cash has to come from somewhere, and that cash comes from the supplier. So it's basically transferring cash that the supplier would have to the OEM. And so when this is phased in over a period of time, it has the effect of lowering the cash at the supplier. And I'm not sure that we fully realized how much that would affect us, and I'm not sure that other people do either. So it's a part of that process is the movement of cash. Basically, it has the effect of extending your terms because your terms move out from when you shipped it to when it gets pulled. So it's just something that is a consideration definitely when that starts to happen.
Good, thank you.
That's why I would encourage communication with your customer on that. It does become cash flow issues that you need to go back and work together with the customer. Because the last thing,
Can we get a microphone on you, Frank?
and this came up before, the last thing I want to hear is that, hey, we had a problem and we can't deliver the stuff because we're on credit hold with our suppliers because of a cash flow problem that you created with us. You need to make sure you surface those things, because I'm also a firm believer that if you look at this stuff, corporate America has $2 trillion of cash on its balance sheet, and yet this phenomena still keeps moving forward. And I think part of it is because everybody measures their performance relative to their peers. And as long as their peers are doing it, everybody else is going to be going down that path as well. So it's something we need to be prepared for, again, and just make sure that it doesn't, compromise our businesses.
Over here?
You have just a comment or a question with regards to on-time delivery and measuring that. Being in the special process, and I'm sure some of you have the same, where you're getting the phone calls, about if their parts are ready even before the parts get there. Schedules are constantly moving. It's hard to even plan an 8-hour shift, because priorities change. How can we, as an industry, have some sort of standardized lead times on, processes take, 6 hours, 8 hours. There's a bake required that's an 8-hour, and we can't get to the, parts back in 10. How can we work together, with our customers and to work around that issue?
Panel members, would somebody like to respond?
I think it comes back to education. We've had customers do exactly what you're saying. I need the parts back in 10 hours. Well, we have a 24-hour bake. Yeah, so? time warp continuum. What don't you get about a 24-hour bake is a 24-hour bake. So I really think it really is education, and it's that connectivity to the customer and the communication. Because you're right, our schedules. What's that? I mean, there is no schedule. The schedule is for this hour, and that's the schedule. And then 5 phone calls later, it's a different schedule. Those type of things. So we worked it out through being really, really intimate with the customers and setting standard leads where we can, and then building in enough capacity to handle that 10%, 15% expedite mode. That's all I can figure out.
Yeah, I'd agree. We have that same phenomenon too. 24-hour, temp humidity test, and they want it back in 8 hours. It's physically impossible. But I think it's all about expectation setting up front and making sure that you're communicating well with your customers and educating them and coming to a compromise. I did want to go back to your comment earlier, Michael, about the visit up to Bombardier and the company that was dealing with that $100,000 fine. One of the questions up here is, what are the unique challenges in achieving this in our industry? And in our business, we're a third-party certification qualification company, and we're accredited by another agency. So if we cut corners and do something that's not appropriate, not only do we get fined or that particular program is in jeopardy, but it's actually our business is in jeopardy if our accreditation gets pulled.
I just want to pick up on one point that was made relative to this, that there's really only 2 reasons that schedules change or that there's expedites. Principally, there's a whole lot of other ones. But if you look at, you really roll this back up, most everything we do goes to support an airframer to make an aircraft, right? And every other component that goes on it. Take a Boeing or take an Airbus, their schedules never change, right? They build 32, 36, 42 aircraft a month. So when it really comes down to it, there's permutations through the change that affects those schedules. But the other one, and why quality is so important, is because quality is probably one of those hidden things that affects our schedules directly and indirectly, constantly, that we really can't control. And when we're on kind of pull systems, where if you got a bad part that's in, everything else stops, right? So everything comes to a stall, and then you get that good part in, and you go, oh, right, hey, I need that batch, plus I need the next one that's coming because the machine's not going to stop. So I think that's one of those things that has a very indirect impact on our overall success, is the quality, not just ours, but everybody else that's on that same platform. Some customers are certainly not as good as a Boeing or an Airbus. And I'll pick on the engine guys, for example. There's a there's a finite number of engines that go onto every aircraft. And if an aircraft is 32 a month, you'd think it would be 64 engines a month. But we never get requirements at 64 a month. So we're so finitely trying to manage those schedules because of primarily quality issues inside our factories, at our suppliers, that has that big whipsaw effect in the overall schedules that you see as an extended supply. So I think that's one of those things of why it's not just about stopping the machine. It has a big overall indirect impact on every one of us if the quality is not what it needs to be.
Going back to the discussion that we had about charging for rejections or failures and how we're kind of shifting that cash flow down to the sub-tiers, I was wondering, any of you up there, as you see this trend kind of proliferate throughout the supply chain and down each individual branch, we had talked about at the last conference how the cost of money for a real sub-tier like a Hickson metal finishing is a lot higher than it is for an OEM, and it's also a lot less accessible. And that money has to come from somewhere, so I assume it would be built into the cost structure of what we're doing for the OEMs. So over time, do any of you guys see that affecting the final product cost to the end users at all? Or do you see that affecting sub-tier survivability in terms of finances? Does that make sense?
would say it's a slippery slope. And you only have to look at the North American auto industry to say it was a good example of shifting a lot of burden down the supply chain. So I think to be honest, we need to be very careful. I absolutely agree with you. There's been a lot of corporate initiatives relative to looking at how you're managing cash flow down. And yes, I mentioned it before, corporate America has trillions of dollars on its balance sheets, and yet you're pushing down financing for some of this to the people that have the highest cost of capital. You're fooling yourself to say in the extended supply chain you're not some way or paying for it, but I'll tell you what, nobody in the chain is willing to accept price increases. So the only way it comes out is how we lean up our businesses to take waste out. I don't know if that's a fair comment down to some of my fellow panel members and stuff as well, but I think that's a little bit of the reality of where the market space is going. So that's an opportunity and really a motivation for how do we take that waste out of our business that it doesn't compromise our ability to be successful on the bottom line in each of our individual businesses. But I agree. I think it's one of the things I've had some debates with our corporate leadership on this particular subject as it relates to both inventory on terms. But part of it is the chase against what all the peers are doing. So it's you're not performing well to your stockholders if you aren't keeping pace with what your peers are doing in the whole cash management perspective. At some point in time, you gotta. It could be it's a balance sheet income statement, right? It's going to show up someplace in your business. So what you got to be able to do is try to keep it off your income statement by leaning up your business.
Other comments, questions?
I'll tag on to that. One of the most frustrating things is to give someone those extended terms that they ask for, and then they pay just like they did before. So you give them 45 or you give them 60, and then they pay in 120. And that is an issue that because everybody's everybody out here has got at least one call or one letter from one of your major customers saying we're going to change your terms and sign here. Not let's discuss, sign here. And then you get paid just like you did before. And that's tough. Then you go back to your bank and they want to cut the receivable because you're past their terms. And so, and I think that's going to continue to be a problem for us as small businesses because we are now the bank. So.
Okay, any comments to Tim's? Okay, down here.
I've heard comments about subjective acceptance criteria and the need for customer education and rational decisions at the front end, lack of communication. What about lean processes up at the front end, at the purchase order and the contract level? Do you lean the front end of things in order to avoid some of these problems? What are your views on how do you take these good lean processes and put them at the front end to help prevent some of these downstream problems?
Since we're a distributor and not a manufacturer, that's where we concentrate a lot of our efforts from in our lean processes. When we mapped our value streams, we said one of the most important ones is right at the sales process and the contract review process. And so, because if we don't get it right there, and then we order the wrong thing, then we deliver the wrong thing, you're, 3 to 10 weeks down the road, and you still don't have what you need. And so, we have in the last 2 years have done at least 5 Kaizen activities in our inside sales customer service around contract review, sales order entry, and quoting to get that right for the customer. So it's not just around a machine. It's your office processes and your engineering processes and as well that can have lean principles applied to them.
Okay, good. I think when we first started C back in 2003 or 4, there was a tube bender. It was taking them 3 weeks to turn around a tube. And when they value streamed out the total process, it was 2 weeks to process the order and get it out on the floor and 4 days to bend the tube. So I think a lot of people through value stream mapping have discovered, where their real problems are. And we've seen a prevailing focus on solving front-end process if that's really the problem, or, going on the shop floor if that's where the problems are. I think a complete value stream map, across the whole value stream helps you to do that. And of course, that also speaks to outside your four walls, right? You do a value stream map across the entire supply chain, all suppliers, and you tend to see those same kinds of issues. So good point. Haven't heard from Glenn yet, and I know you've prepared some comments, Glenn, so let's hear from you.
I guess I come from the humble machine tool industry, so I'm not really too involved with parts per million and zero defect. I mean, not specifically. Obviously, implicitly, there is always a quality issue. But I do have to say that I work for a Swiss machine tool, and quality is in the DNA of the Swiss. Any of you who've ever traveled in Switzerland and have ever had the pleasure of using the Swiss railway will know that it's unbelievable how well that works, and in terms of zero defect and perfect timing, it's a great example. Well, that's an aside. I think the contribution that I would like to make is probably one that you will see as having something of a vested interest. But when we talk about lean and we talk about all of those things that are associated to the process of lean, one of the things that I feel is missing somewhat in North America at the moment is investment. And when I consider the amount of investment that is we're seeing from China, for instance, I hate to use the C word all the time. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. But just to perhaps to provide an amusing anecdote that may add something to the debate, my company, or our company, recently took its largest single order in the world. It came from a Chinese company that is not in the you'll be glad to know, it's not in the aerospace industry. It's in the mass production of electronic consumer goods. That company purchased 150 machines from us to build a production facility in the south of China. And here's the kicker. 50 of those machines were a sophisticated die sink machine. And I won't bore you with the details of that process, but die sinking is quite a sophisticated process. For the production of something to do with it's either we're actually not absolutely sure, but it's either a smartphone or it's a tablet PC. But anyway, the point of the story is that 50 of those machines were for these very, very sophisticated high-end die sinkers. And the irony of the story is that we don't supply that level of die sink machine in the United States because we can't convince our customers to buy it. So it tells you something. It tells you something about the appetite, really, for investment here in North America. And when we're looking, perhaps, to improve our effectiveness and our competitiveness, then perhaps a little less conservancy when it comes to investment might not be too bad a thing.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Glenn? Okay, and Mario, I think you are the last man in the barrel.
I just wanted to say, absolutely, you can do improvements in the front office. We call the shop floor Kaizens. The front office, they're process Kaizens. And it's the same approach. You map out what you currently do, you identify areas where you can streamline, and you create standard work. And what that would yield you, or what it has yielded us, are a flow chart of our order entry all the way through invoice, the paperwork flow. We have a standardized contracts and pricing template that no matter who initiates pricing negotiations, they start at the same point using the same template. We all know the short-term and long-term strategic position of the company, the customer segments we're going after. All that is really good stuff, and it creates camaraderie in the front office. And then when you cross-train and back people up, vacations and people getting sick and going on maternity is a non-issue. So absolutely, business process Kaizens are a good thing. But I just wanted to comment a little bit about on-time delivery. For us, it wasn't so much achieving on time as it was sustaining it. And so we figured out, how do you sustain it? Well, if you have processes, then you're able to sustain your on-time delivery. But you need process owners. So we took our lead men and they became process owners. But a process owner doesn't make him effective unless he's skilled and knowledgeable. So we invested time and money in the process owner. And I kept telling our managers, we need skilled and knowledgeable process owners so they can develop skilled and knowledgeable operators. So once we have that, those process owners can actually manage the processes and manage a department. And once your department is process driven, then you have standardized work, then you can have incremental improvement and ongoing improvement. So one of the most things I'm proud of is when we have a non-conformance, everybody immediately thinks 5M, and they use the 5M model as to do some root cause analysis because it's easy, it's quick, and everybody understands it. Usually we do a short-term fix, and then if it's longer, then we schedule a Kaizen event. So that kind of talks a little bit about our journey, but it talks about the investment and costs, because over the years, I have this group called the Board of Directors that I have to meet with every quarter. But over the years, the cost of investing in with our employees, the cost of training, the cost of investing in employees, and the cost of Kaizen is now buried into our day-to-day, month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter cost of doing business. So I don't even have to cover the cost of Kaizen or the cost of improvement. It's in there, it's built in. And I took a risk. Well, I believe that if I invested in our employees, they would better the processes and increase the profit. And there would never be an overage of cost because of training or because of investment. And that has become true. And so I rarely talk about training with the board of directors. I don't talk about Kaizen. I don't talk about money to invest in our employees. It's just happening. They don't question it. They like the sales trend. They like the profit trend. But more importantly, I have confidence that we're process driven. And so I know our on-time delivery is achievable and sustainable, and our quality levels are bona fide. That's a really good place to be when you get there. That's the aerospace company. I also run a plastic blow molding company. They're not there, and that's what keeps me up at night. That's where my ulcers come from, and that's why I carry a bottle of Tums in my pocket. But that's another story for another time.
Thank you. Questions or comments for Mario? Yes.
Thanks, Jeff. My name is Jason Mershot. I'm from Advanced Process Optimization. I heard we had some discussions here about inventory levels. We understand that in lean practice that, inventory is really the physical manifestation of inefficiencies in your process, by and large, right? If you have large inventories, you know there's something going on. It's really about uncertainty. And also about the ability to quantify the value of investment is another thing. So I'm curious to understand on the panel what tools you guys might use in terms of identifying your risk profile. Meaning, we heard a little bit about defect creation too, and perhaps we don't know if we're going to make a defect. Do we do things like failure mode effect analysis? Do we do things like capability studies on our machines? Do we use the Taguchi method to determine what an investment might make sense relative to our risk profile? So there's some other tools in the lean toolkit. Typically we start with value stream mapping, some of these other things, but there's some more sophisticated tools, and I'm curious to see how far down the maturity model some of the panel's gone with some of those different tools.
I'll just comment. We also grind sheet and plate. We brought on two grinders, and I told our maintenance team, along with the project engineer, is you own the machines and you don't hand them over until they're capable and reliable. So let's talk about the expectations and how do we quantify that. So we defined what the capability of the machine would be. We defined what reliability would look like. We already had test material ready to go. And so maintenance owned the machine until we reached those levels. And then if those levels faltered anywhere within a 90-day period, we would give them back to maintenance. You did not want to do that because at a staff meeting, we would be saying the machine is going back to maintenance because it's not capable or reliable. So that created a sense of pressure, but we had the teamwork going in there. So there was pressure. Nobody wanted to look bad, and the team did hand the machine over to production, but within 30 days it wasn't running right. So we had to give it back to maintenance, and the project engineer was furious. He was trying to make up excuses why it shouldn't be back. So it was a learning for me that I think in a friendly, trusting environment, because I had to tell the engineer the end result is we need a satisfied customer. That's the goal. Not for you to look good, not for production to look good, not for me to hand it back. The goal is our customers need to be satisfied, and we need to hit the quality level and hit the on-time delivery. If the machine is incapable of that, we shouldn't be risking that. So at a very high simplified level, that was one of the things that we did. It was having agreement ahead of time on what the deliverables were, what the desired outcomes were going to be, and what would be the consequence, in this case, giving it back to the project team for further refinement of the machine. I'm sure there was more technical measures as well, but.
Our shop has largely gone paperless through most of the manufacturing, and that is terrific until something goes down, and then it's really bad because all of a sudden nobody can make a part in the entire organization. So we successfully applied FMEA to look at that particular process in a very traditional failure mode way, where the ultimate failure is lack of data. And we found that we had 5 servers talking to each other, and if any one of them had any kind of hiccup, that it would shut the system down, and ended up redesigning our entire infrastructure because of that, but we were able to successfully use it in that situation.
Any other comments from panel members?
That Glenn spoke to, and that had to do with capital investment, and not so much from technology, which I think technology is important that we need to be doing, but I'm also curious because I think we're getting close to a perfect storm relative to all the new platforms that are in production that are ramping up, right? Who's on 737? Who does any business with 737? How about the 320 lines? How about new platforms, Bombardier, C-Series? Okay. All right, some common denominators. How about 350? 787. The Embraer legacy programs. See, all of these are coming. I mean, we're ramping up, and we've got an unprecedented number of new platforms that are in development that are going to be coming to production by 2017. I think the biggest issue we had when Boeing in the probably 80s ramped up 737, shut down the aerospace industry, right? What's coming is dramatically different than that. We need to really make sure, and I don't think collectively as an industry we do this very well, is to really look at our rate capacity, both with people and equipment, to make sure we're ready for this. And in a lot of ways, we've reconciled our supply base down, so we have fewer choices to go out to because we've kind of reconciled it down to the better performers. So we've got probably more volume in fewer places today, and I'll bet most haven't invested much in capital for quite some time.
Interestingly, GE Aviation called my company in December. I hope nobody here is from GE Aviation. I don't want to offend anybody. But in December, they called us and said, we have $64 million to spend. What do you have in stock? It tells you something, you know? It tells you a lot. There is certainly, in my view, the aerospace industry is under capacity at the moment, and under capacity in terms of technology as well. When we compare what's going on in Europe and what we see today in Asia, there's an enormous amount of investment in very, very sophisticated equipment, and frankly, there's a little less investment in the same levels of sophisticated equipment here. until there is that imperative to burn the cash. And when there's the imperative to burn the cash, then rash decisions are made rather than really sound, forward-thinking decisions.
Audience, comments or questions? So going back, Jason, I think you did get an answer to your question. It may not. Yeah. Microphone, please.
Sorry, Michael, but yeah, I said one of the answers was ultimately centered around, if you think about the core of the response, was really understanding it's about organizational change and transformation. You may do things lean internally, but if you do it in a, let's say, an operational silo, it doesn't. If you're not using the voice of the customer perspective, then you haven't really transformed your organization. So your organizational transformation is complete when everyone is looking in the best interest of the company. You have metrics that are aligned to your strategic corporate vision, and you're being rewarded based on those. Everyone's rowing the ship in the same direction, and the customer satisfaction goes up, and things are standardized, so you can only do it one way. You engineer out the possibility for defects that way. So that was a fantastic answer. I mean, that was, it couldn't have been put any better. The other part that Mr. Cox said was, relative to, once you start moving up the technology maturity profile too, let's say you get into MRP and MES systems and ERP systems, you have to be sure that you put in risk mitigation practices such that now that you're so dependent on this operationalized and systematized standards, that if that fails, does it put us out of business, right? So understanding your risk profile relative to any given process is just as important as understanding the process that you're doing itself. It's probably number two. So, doing your process well, number one, then understanding, what's your risk profile is probably the second most important. So I thought those were fantastic answers, certainly.
Good, thank you. Other comments, questions? Okay, and panel, comments, questions?
Well, I think we're missing one very important question here. We've talked about where we are today, 100% quality, 100% on-time delivery. But I see a somewhat disturbing trend as where's the future of this? We have a customer, tier 2 customer, very large customer, that we're 100% on-time delivery, 100% on the quality, and our overall score was 60. The reason it was 60 is because they didn't think we were doing anything continuous improvement. The other part of that was we didn't give them cost-benefit savings over the last 12 months. So we had a 60% score. We made every delivery. Every part was perfect. So it disturbs me because some of this is already subjective. Now you're going to talk about somebody that has never been to our facility that is rating us from literally 100 miles away on the basis of our continuous improvement, lean journey, all those type of things. We got a 0. And then, of course, cost savings, because we went in and bid the part as lean as we possibly could a year ago. They expected more back, and because they didn't get that, we got downgraded. So I'd like to maybe open up the dialogue a little bit about where is the future of these ratings. Because if you're going to be 100% on-time delivery and 100% quality, I understand there's a risk factor, and the OEMs certainly need to look at the risk of for instance, a processor. Are we doing the things right? Or are we going to cause an environmental disaster? Or are we going to catch on fire? I get all those things. But if they don't even show up at your door to look around and kick the tires, it seems that that's extremely subjective. And of course, we argued, and they said the score is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good. And so that's an excellent kind of a place to stop for a break. No, I mean, Doug is really... No, seriously, Doug is really queuing up. Actually, he's queuing up the next discussion, but it just flows right into this one. And, I want you to, participate in that discussion. How are we being measured? and what effect is it having on us? So I want to do that, but I also want to kind of recap and put a cap on this discussion as well.